This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is David Icke, the English writer and public speaker known since the 1990s as a professional conspiracy researcher, calling yourself a full-time investigator into who and what is really controlling the world. You are the author of 21 books and 10 DVDs and have lectured in over 25 countries, speaking live for up to 10 hours to huge audiences, filling stadiums like Wembley Arena. You are here for the second occasion today to talk about the COVID-19 pandemic and global lockdown, the looming economic recession, the impact of 5G technology, and the violations of our rights and freedoms of speech. David, welcome back to London Real.
Thank you, Brian.
It's been 19 days since you last came on the show. Since then, we are told that millions of people have been infected worldwide with this disease, with deaths now approaching 100,000. Nearly 3 billion people are locked down in their homes, markets are off 30%, and a global recession is pending. Our last conversation went, quite frankly, viral, David. Over 7 million views that I can count, the most comments of any episode in London Real history, which tells me one thing, that people want to hear your opinion and people want to hear the truth. David, as you know, I don't agree with everything you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. And at a time in this country when the regulator Ofcom is banning media outlets from talking about the quote-unquote 5G coronavirus conspiracy theories, I get very concerned. A lot of people told me not to do this interview today again, but in America, where I'm from, the First Amendment of the Constitution is the right to free speech and freedom of the press, and that right is being violated right now as we speak. George Orwell, in his famous book, 1984, said, "In times of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act." And David, that's what we're going to do today. Honestly, I didn't even know if we'd make it to this moment. I thought we might be shut down today. Where do we start? Is there a virus?
Since we last spoke, Brian, I've spent every waking moment, which has been most of every 24 hours, devouring information from virologists, specialists, doctors all around the world, in America, in Germany, in Austria, Italy, who would never be allowed to get near the BBC or CNN because they are demolishing the official story of this hoax. And if people go to davidicke.com when this interview is over, I put a special posting of a series of videos. It says for viewers to London Real, a series of videos by these doctors and others who in their various ways support all the elements of what I'm going to say today. So this is not me pulling it out the ether. There's no point in that. What's the point? You either deal with facts and what people who should know say, or you don't. So this is the headline to start with, which will shock a lot of people, I'm sure. There is no COVID-19. It doesn't exist. And I'm going to explain today why that is and how, therefore, a pandemic perception could be pulled off. Now, one of the doctors that I've been looking at is called Andrew Kaufman. He is a medical doctor in America. He works in psychiatry now. And he, like a lot of these doctors you'll never see on the BBC, started looking at the sequence of events that's led us to where we are now. And this is how it went. People started getting ill, for whatever reason, in China. And the Chinese authorities took genetic material from the fluid in the lungs of people who got ill. Only a few, a very small number. And they found what we would call genetic material. It wasn't an isolated virus, It was genetic material which can be there from a long list of causes, including lung cancer, by the way. And they decided that what was causing the illness was a virus, which has got the name COVID-19. But at no time did they isolate that so-called virus from the rest of the genetic material, much of which will be found in the bodies of most people. So they start out, before they started testing, diagnosing people in China from symptoms. And you will have heard this constantly recurring theme about coronavirus or COVID-19, because there's lots of coronaviruses, COVID-19 symptoms. And you'll hear this recurring line, flu-like symptoms. Now, these flu-like symptoms can be caused by a great range of different causes. But they decided on symptoms, which could come from many different causes, that those symptoms were now COVID-19. So you had flu-like symptoms, COVID-19. COVID-19. And so the numbers got bigger and bigger. And when we get to 5G, there is another element to this, which I also want to talk about in relation to China and in relation to the West as well. But they then develop this test, or start using this test, to test for COVID-19. And it's called an RT-PCR test. And, wait for it, it doesn't test for COVID-19. It tests for the genetic material, which has loads of different content, caused by many, many, many different possible causes. And if you test positive for the genetic material, not COVID-19, you are diagnosed to have COVID-19, and if you die, to have died from it. Now let's look at this RT-PCR test. It was developed, invented by a guy called Kary Mullis, a biochemist in America, in 1984. And it's used to try to diagnose many things. The same test has been used to try to diagnose lung cancer. The same test of genetic material that they are saying, you test positive, you've got COVID-19. Now, what did this Kary Mullis say? The inventor of the test, we must get more people tested for COVID-19. The inventor of the test, what did he say? This test should not be used to diagnose infectious disease. The inventor of it said that. What are they doing to tell us who has and has not got this so-called COVID-19? The test that he says shouldn't be used for that very thing. So you test for this genetic material and you've got COVID-19, but there's another part of this. What this test does is it amplifies the material. In other words, it makes it larger, keep it simple, and as it gets larger in the cycles of amplification, what you say is causing the disease gets bigger and you can see it more, or say you can. I'm going to come to that in a second. But all the other content of the genetic material also gets amplified. And loads of this genetic material is already in the body of virtually everybody. And this is how the test works. You can fix the figures so easy like this. You do, say, 30, 35 cycles of amplification, you're going to bring into the test positive a series of things within that genetic material that become there to be seen at that level. So you're going to get some positives, which you're going to call COVID-19, but you're going to get some negatives because you haven't brought all that material into the testing process. But you amplify the genetic material, say, I don't know, 60 times. You have brought so much of the content of the genetic material to be entering the test process that at that level of amplification, virtually everybody will test positive, because all the genetic material that's in most people's body will now be testing positive in the test through this greater amplification. This means that the number of cycles of amplification you use, say in different countries, dictates how many positive tests you get. And therefore, all you've got to do is increase the amplification. You're going to get more and more positives, and you're going to call them COVID-19.
And amplification is how sensitive that test is.
Imagine you've got something the size of a pin, symbolically, pinhead. You can't really understand it because it's so small. You amplify it, and it becomes much greater, and you can now start looking at different elements of it.
And that's what the test does. It amplifies that.
It amplifies amplification. And another thing is that in 1890, a guy called Robert Koch, who was a bacteriologist and a physician, he developed something called the Koch postulates. And these were 4 criteria for proving that an agent, a so-called infectious agent, is the cause of what you say it is. This includes everyone who is subject to this agent has the same symptoms. 2, that you have isolated this agent, call it a virus, bacteria, whatever. You've isolated it, so there's no other material, only that. So there's no contamination, there's no false positives in the way I've described. You are only isolating that. But when you take that and you, say, inject it into a living host, that host will get what you say that is causing. And when you got that host, you are able, number 4, to take that material you say is causing the illness, the infectious illness, out of the person, and again inject it into someone else, and they will get it. In terms of COVID-19, not one single one of those 4 Koch postulates, which have been used since 1890 by mainstream medicine the world over to prove that this is infecting and causing that, not one of them have been used and fulfilled. None of them. So then we come to something else that Andrew Kaufman identified, which was a tremendous piece of observation and research. You can see it in his video on davidite.com when this is over. What happens when a cell gets poisoned is it secretes something called exosomes. This is part of the natural, everyday immune system response to poison cells. And these exosomes, as they are released, and they're only released when the cell is poisoned, and it can be poisoned through many, many reasons. It can be toxicity, wait for this one, it can be poisoned through stress and fear. You imagine the stress and fear that's going on in the world now during this lockdown. It can be caused by disease, infection, and it can be caused by electromagnetic fields, which will become very relevant when we get into 5G. So these exosomes are released, and one of the roles of exosomes is poison cells warning other cells as they travel around, there's a problem. Get ready. Look, there's a problem here. So all you have to do to get exosomes released is to have poison cells by these various reasons. What Kaufman started looking at was under the microscope pictures of exosomes, what they look like. And then he looked at an under the microscope picture of what he's claimed to be COVID-19. These two were exactly the same. He then starts looking at the genetic makeup of the exosomes, which you will find in the lung fluid of people who have problems with the lungs, because the problems are generating the release of exosomes. And he looked at the genetic makeup claimed for COVID-19. They are exactly the same in every relevant way. An exosome and so-called COVID-19 even lock into the same cell receptors as each other. They are, as Kaufman has clearly shown, the same thing. So what's gone on here is they've taken a natural response mechanism of the body, immune system, to poisonous cells, and they've renamed it COVID-19. Now, this genetic material they've taken from the lungs of people, and what is the basis of this test, will contain, by its very nature, these exosomes. So they're finding a natural human immune system response mechanism, this secretion from poison cells, and they're calling it COVID-19. And because anyone who has any level of cellular toxicity is going to produce these exosomes, then the potential for positive tests, yes, COVID-19, it's a pandemic, is endless. So what has happened is it was decided in China, and by the way, if you get deeper into this, and I hope we will later, about why this is being done, this global cult that I have been exposing for 30 years, that is pushing the world towards this global fascist Orwellian state, which I've been saying was coming for 30 years, hello, we're here, has no borders. It operates in every country in the shadows. Politicians are just here today, gone tomorrow. That's always there. China is one of its biggest centers, along with America, Israel, Britain, Germany, Italy. And so just follow this sequence through. They decide in China early on, and there's a 5G element to this, which we'll get into later, that it's a virus. They don't isolate the virus. They test it, or they diagnose it, first of all, only on symptoms. And then they start testing, and they use this test, which is testing for genetic material, not COVID-19. And then it starts moving out into the West. And Western doctors, nurses, medical professionals, etc., are told this COVID-19 is moving out. World Health Organization, it's a pandemic. And we'll get into who owns the World Health Organization later. And these are the symptoms. So what do they start doing? Anyone with flu-like symptoms now gets diagnosed COVID-19 purely on frickin' symptoms. And so the numbers start to go up. The problem is that this is supposed to be a deadly virus, but there's not enough people dying to justify that, that description. So this is what they start doing. Anyone who gets ill for any reason whatsoever, by the way, even falling down the frickin' stairs, and goes to hospital, they now get tested for COVID-19. Now, because they're testing for genetic material, which is in lots of people's bodies, they get lots of positives. And although they're in hospital for late-stage cancer, for heart disease and heart failure, and for other caused flu-like symptoms, if they've tested positive for COVID-19, when they die, they are diagnosed as having died, officially, from COVID-19. This is why you are having more and more people, families, loved ones, saying, my family member, whatever, has been diagnosed as having died from COVID-19, and they didn't. They died from this, they died from that. They've had it for ages. Great example. For people around the world watching this, there was one time a famous comedian called Eddie Large in a comedy duo called Little and Large. And Eddie Large has had a heart problem for a while, it seems. And he goes into hospital with heart failure. While he's in hospital, he gets diagnosed with COVID-19, of course, tested him. And when he died, the wording in the papers, in the media, was that Eddie Large died in hospital after testing positive for COVID-19. He died of a failing heart. But COVID-19 will be the diagnosis, and the numbers keep going up.
And you're saying the total numbers of deaths in the world has not changed anomalously, but we've reclassified them as COVID-19 because they tested positive. And you said the language is interesting because they don't say they died from COVID-19, they died from after testing positive to COVID-19.
This is interesting. I've been making this point now for some many days. Watch the media language as they used with Eddie Large. Overwhelmingly, they're not saying that this person or this number have died from COVID-19. Very difficult to die from something you can't even prove exists. They say, this is the wording, and you see it repeated all the time, this person or this number died after testing positive for COVID-19. Not that they died from it, but look at the implication. Oh, Eddie Large, he died from COVID-19. Oh, everyone's getting it. And so you have control of the figures by the way you transfer symptoms from other causes to you've got COVID-19. You control the figures by the way you test, not for COVID-19, but for a genetic material. And you control the death figures by who you designate as died from COVID-19 when they've died from other things. You know, people are being designated to have died from COVID-19 who have late-stage cancer. And here's a figure for you, Brian. This is official figures from the Italian medical establishment, what we would call in Britain the National Health Service. 99% of people who have died from COVID-19 in Italy, 99% have had 1, 2, 3 or more other health problems for which they were in hospital or for which they were suffering. And so it's so easy to take people dying of other things and to then designate them COVID-19. This is not to say all the nurses and all the doctors are in on it. You only need a hierarchy to say this is what you have to do, and they do it. This is how it works. And you mentioned something very important. The last time I looked, the death figures from all causes in Europe overall and in the United Kingdom had not risen, compared with last year, etc., to the extent that even begins to encompass all the people we are told are dying from COVID-19. And the reason that is, but that could change for reasons I'll come to when we get to 5G, the reason that is vastly more people are not dying. They're being redesignated to have died from COVID-19 when they've died from other things. Now, let's look at Lombardy, which is the center of the Italian outbreak, which has been such a focus of attention, and the rest of Europe and the Western world has been frightened to death, or we could be Italy next. Lombardy, which includes Milan, is notorious globally for its toxic, polluted air, just as Wuhan is and China is. And therefore, vastly more people die every year in Lombardy, not least from lung problems, than do in the rest of Italy. The last figures I saw, just a small few hundred, under 100,000 people died in a year in Lombardy. The next second place Italian region, Lazio, was 57,000. So you have an area of Italy where loads of people die, not least from lung disease, and you have tremendous potential, therefore, to make this diagnostic leap, which takes people dying of other things and makes it seem as if they've died from COVID-19. And therefore, you control the figures. And what you can do, you can test in a certain way, and you can diagnose in a certain way, and the figures go up. And then when you diagnose and test in a different way, maybe you reduce the number of cycles of amplification of this genetic material that you're using in the test, the figures go down. Have you noticed something, mate? We had in China this extraordinary reaction, the lockdown. They were building new hospitals in a week to 10 days to meet the absolute devastating crisis of this virus, right? In next to no time, by comparison with where they were, those hospitals are closed. The numbers have plummeted, they say. They're now starting flights. The economy is reopening. People are going back out on the streets. What happened suddenly to change all that? Because it was suddenly. But if you are testing people in a certain way and you're diagnosing people in a certain way, and we're going to bring 5G into this later on as well, then you change the diagnosis and you change the way you're testing. And what happens to the numbers? They frickin' plummet. Now, another aspect of this, Brian, which is sickening beyond belief, but I've seen enough evidence to see that it's true from people that have contacted me, and people have even said things on social media about, what's happened to their loved ones. They want, and when I say they, I mean this cult, which controls the pyramid of reaction. They obviously want as many dead people as possible that can be designated COVID-19, because that adds to this whole pandemic.
And we're going to talk about why later.
We are going to talk about why, because it's a very, very big and simple reason why, and it relates to why there's a lockdown at all. But what's clearly happening is that old people in hospital, for anything, first of all, they're being tested for COVID-19, this genetic material. And for reasons I've explained, they're going to, a lot of them are going to test positive. Not for the virus, for the genetic material. They're going to them, and according to loved ones and families, the people on the ward, etc., have said to them it's government policy. And they're trying to get these old people. You know the old people that the lockdown was to protect? Yeah, right. They're trying to get them to sign do not resuscitate forms, which means they can be allowed to die and not resuscitated. And when they die without resuscitation, they will be called COVID-19. Have you noticed how this is now starting to seep out? Oh, we may have to make choices about
the triage,
about who we treat, and the older people. Well, we're going to have to make some hard choices. Old people that you're telling not to resuscitate, to sign non-resuscitation forms, right? So they are despicably abusing the very old people that they say this lockdown is to protect. One of the family members that contacted me talked about her 83-year-old mother who was in hospital for an orthopedic reason. Not some bloody virus. And the doctors came along to her and tried to get her to sign a do not resuscitate form, for she's got an orthopedic problem. And, she had her faculties about her and she refused, but a lot of people won't, because a lot of old people won't. They won't know what's going on.
And they're trying to get them to sign it so they can save the other people.
That's what they say. But Orwellian language, Brian, you have to invert everything. They're getting them to sign it so that they can let them die. And everyone who dies is a COVID-19 because they're tested. This is the scam that's going on. And what it means is that they control the figures by the way that they test, by the way they diagnose, and the way they count them. And thus, the figures can be allowed to go up and up and up to justify further lockdown. And then when they think, as I said towards the end of our last interview a couple of weeks ago, when will it be over? It will be over, actually temporarily, we can come to that later, when they think they have reached the point where everything they want from this, which is a completely destroyed global economy, it is vast numbers of people who've lost their independent livelihood and income, and thus become dependent on the state, and you do what the state says if you want your pittance every month. They will bring an end to this and bring the numbers down. Oh, we're past the curve. When they think it's gone far enough for them to have got everything they wanted from it. Look at China. Look at China. They did exactly the same. Oh, it's terrible, terrible. Oh, gone.
How can it be gone in China?
How can it be gone?
Doesn't make any sense.
No sense.
Billion-plus people.
No sense.
This is infectious in urban environments. They have them everywhere. Now,
No
people
sense.
say they're lying about those numbers. I had a doctor on this. As the CIA has seen these funeral urns being bought, and those are going through the roof.
Well, all you can say is that they're opening up China. They're opening up industry. People are going out on the street, and they're opening up air travel again. The whole point is, however, that the authorities control the figures, so they control. And there's another way that they control the figures when we get into 5G, and thus they can decide when this thing comes down anytime they want, just by changing the way that they count and changing the way that they
test.
They test. Now, look at this sequence. They were not getting enough dead people from this virus to justify the fact that it was lethal. The vast, overwhelming majority of people have no symptoms or mild symptoms. Now, just before I go to this point, something else I should add. This RT-PCR test cannot and does not test for how much of a, quote, virus you have. And I will be sitting here now, you'll be sitting there now, everyone watching this program will be sitting there, and they have all these different, what people call viruses, actually part of the natural immune system, but they will have that in their bodies. And it will be at a level, loads of it, and it will be at a level that will never trouble them. That's why you can test positive for something and have no symptoms, because it's at such a low level, it's going to trouble you. The immune system sort that out, keeps it all under control. So, what you can't do with this test is test for how much of a, quote, virus you actually have. And in the words of one doctor scientist that I've quoted in recent times, you need massive amounts of it for you to be sick. So they can't even begin to tell you if your sickness is from some virus or other unless they can test how much of it you have. And this test doesn't do that. So, you don't have enough dead people to justify the fact that this is lethal. But you want a lockdown. You want this lockdown for much greater reasons, which we'll come to. So what you do is you say, oh yeah, well not that many people have died so far, but what's coming, have you noticed all around the world, that's what you're getting? Oh, wait for the surge. Well, the surge can come anytime they want to increase the way that they test and increase the way that they count the numbers. So they can create a surge, that's not a problem, or the illusion of one, but it's in the future. So along comes, in this country, and they also advised America too, and other countries in the same way, along comes, while Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, is saying, oh, there's no need for this, there's no need to shut the football down, no, and there's no need to close the schools, you remember that? Along comes Imperial College. And Imperial College specialise in absolutely shite computer modelling. They have a terrible history for it over the years. You know the computer models that say the ice cap should have gone by now, right? Because we're all dying from global warming. How do you know? Because my computer model says so, right? So they computer modelled COVID-19. Particularly a guy called Professor Neil Ferguson, who should never, ever, in the entirety of his life, ever advise any government ever again. And he says, Mr. Johnson, 250,000 to 500,000 people could die in Britain of this virus. So now, Johnson shuts himself. Because he's having people saying to him, you know, Boris, you know, this is what could happen, mate, if you don't lock it down, if you don't have social distancing and all that stuff. And you know something, mate, you're going to be blamed for it. Oh, massive change attack. And from, oh, look, we're not going to close the schools. We don't need to close the football, because football wasn't shut down by Johnson. It was shut down by the football authorities. Suddenly, lockdown. And what they're doing all around the world, they're doing it in increments. Oh, a little bit, and they get people used to that. And then, oh, fiercer. And they're doing it in increments. And they plan, if we allow it, let's get into that later as well, they plan to push this on into more extremes. And so when the lockdown happens and everyone's basically under frickin' house arrest, he said, Ferguson, that million, 2 million, whatever it was, Americans were going to die from this.
2.1 million.
Yeah, right.
500,000 in the UK.
Yeah, exactly. When the lockdown happens, he suddenly rolls back, right? Oh no, it's less than 20,000. Someone else from Imperial College, which is very closely connected to Freemasons, by the way, and Freemasonry. And by the way, the part of the college where Ferguson works takes funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which we are going to get in seriously to later on. Because Gates is absolutely, as a gopher, but a rich one of this cult, he is right involved in this, in ways that we'll come to. So now he's rolling it back. And someone else from Imperial College suddenly says, oh no, it could be 7,500 who'll die.
Yeah, or even less. I heard like 5,700.
Yeah. But the lockdowns happened. And the lockdown happened on it's going to be 250,000, right? You imagine, Brian, another computer modeler came along, government advisor. Well, my model says that ain't going to happen. No. We don't have to shut anything down. It's not going to happen. How long would he be a government advisor? Yeah, 30 seconds. They get what they want to do what they want. And so we are now in this lockdown, and in a matter of days, weeks at most, we have gone from what people perceived as a free world to global fascism, global tyranny, in which a tiny, tiny few people have got billions, half the world's population, under house arrest. And it's been done by scamming this whole COVID-19 thing, which brings me, mate, to 5G.
Before we go to 5G, question for you.
Go on.
I've been watching Trump's live conferences every night, and he has Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx that come up. Are they aware that this test might not be accurate? Are they part of this, or are they just following the numbers? Oh, you tested? Okay. Oh, you tested? Then that's a death. Are they part of this, or are they just reacting as medical professionals and scientists?
You'd have to do serious research into both of them to answer that question. But this is how it works. You've got a pyramid. This is how this cult works. You've got a pyramid, and at the top are the inner circle of the cult that are driving this globally. As you come down from the pyramid peak, you're meeting more and more and more people, but each step down know less and less and less of what they know. Because the only way that a few can manipulate the world as they do is by fierce compartmentalization, where people only know what they need to know to make their contribution without knowing how their contribution connects with their contribution and theirs and theirs and theirs, to create a very different picture to what they think they're actually part of. So as you come down, the top of the pyramid, they absolutely know they're manipulating. They know it's a scam. But you're in the medical profession, and you are told these are the symptoms. When you see these symptoms, you diagnose COVID-19. When anyone comes into hospital, you test for COVID-19. If they die of whatever, you put COVID-19 on the death certificate. So what's this great line? In and after every tyranny, I was only following orders. This is how it works. But some nurses and some medical professionals, professionals, one I'm going to come to in a second with 5G, have broken ranks and said, this is crap. We're diagnosing COVID-19 for people, deaths that have not died from it, and so on. And also, we're being asked to get old people to sign do not resuscitate forms. So some of them are breaking ranks, but most of them won't. They just carry on and just, they might complain and moan under their breath, but they do it. This is how it works. So you have this World Health Organization. Who's the second biggest funder of the World Health Organization, second only to the United States government? Bill Gates. He owns it. And so this Tedros, this guy from Ethiopia, from the Marxist human rights destroying government of Ethiopia, who was the health minister of Ethiopia and was caught out 3 times for covering up cholera epidemics, he's head of the World Health Organization for no other reason than he'll do what he's told. So the World Health Organization is driving this policy, a World Health Organization created by the Rockefellers, by the way.
That is constantly making the wrong calls the last few months.
The right call for the cult, the wrong call for humanity. And so from this World Health Organization, you're having this policy and this way of doing things coming down. You therefore just follow it. You follow the protocol. And I'll give you a great example of that in a second when we get to 5G. So, because China imposed that vicious draconian lockdown, and then the numbers started falling, what did that do? It set the precedent in countries that followed. The way to deal with this, like China has, is to have a lockdown and keep people away from each other. It's a scam, and this cult is orchestrating it. While I put a meme on the internet in the last fortnight, and it's a picture of the Earth, and it says ruled by psychopaths, run by idiots. And that dynamic is how it works. You've got the psychopaths in the background who are orchestrating it, and then you've got the clueless, who am I, where am I, what's going on, people in politics, etc., who are responding to that policy like, oh, everyone's going to die, oh, we better lock down then, who are clueless about what's actually going on.
I don't feel like Trump and Boris are part of this grand scheme. They look like they're reacting to a situation and trying to save themselves politically, and maybe trying to save people based on those constraints or those beliefs.
You look at Boris Johnson, who's, as we speak, he's in hospital. They've got him out of the way, really. And isn't it amazing, all those people at the press conference every day, COVID-19 lockdown, all got COVID-19 at the same time. I thought it was very strange. Anyway, you look at Boris Johnson's face. He looks a bewildered, lost man. Because he ain't calling the shots. He'll get the blame for it, but he ain't calling the shots. His advisors are calling the shots. That's what's driving it. The shadows are driving the policy. This is why the same policy is happening in every country, because it's essentially globally dictated. And Trump has tried to, I have great problems with Trump, but Trump has tried, at least publicly, to push back against this, because they know their own political careers as prime minister and president are going to be absolutely destroyed by this economic Armageddon that these lockdowns have created, based on what? frickin' computer models and a bloody virus that doesn't exist and never has been shown to be. So they've been pushing back, but look at the pressure. Mr. Trump, 2 million Americans are going to die if you don't lock the country down, right?